San Diego schools look inward in the wake of last month's mass shooting tragedy in Florida. What are they doing to keep students safe? A policy that separates families seeking asylum in the U.S. is challenged, while the future for dreamers remains unclear. And startling revelations about a horse rescue operation in North County. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, education reporter Megan Burks of KPBS News, KPBS Fronteras reporter Jean Guerrero, Kate Morrissey, who covers immigration for the San Diego Union Tribune, and managing editor Laura Wingard of iNewsSource. Well, this week, students from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, went back to classes for the first time since 14 students and 3 staff members were murdered there on Valentine's Day. Expelled from school, the shooter was well known to Florida authorities as violent, angry, and fond of guns. The challenge in trying to prevent mass shootings is determining who is a threat and figuring out what to do. So, Megan, what tools are available to school authorities here in San Diego County?
So they've been training on this threat assessment tool that came out after the Columbine shooting in 1999. They're working to get all of the school districts in the county up to speed on this. There is also a special prosecutor in the district attorney's office, and so they've had that for 4 years to kind of track all of these cases, and they're working to better share information also at this point. Okay, and
made the news this week, several threats of at least 9 here locally just since that shooting there in Florida. What was done in some of these cases? Give us a couple examples.
So there was a case where a student had posted a picture of a gun made out of Legos on Instagram with a threatening caption. There was some graffiti at Rancho Bernardo High School that was threatening a school shooting on a certain date. The response to all of these kind of varies, and it depends on the severity of the threat. I don't know exactly what's going on with the student at West Hills High School who tweeted that Lego gun, posted that Instagram photo. But in a case like that, if the student meant it as a joke or something like that, there is kind of a restorative justice process that happens within the school, at the school site. If it's more serious, where there was absolutely intent to harm, maybe that person had started researching school shootings or purchasing guns, or they had access to guns, they might be charged with giving a criminal threat, and they may be placed on probation depending on the severity.
And it's so difficult to be in the business of predicting human behavior, which is what we're talking about. You interviewed Bob Mueller, head of Student Support Services, County Office of Education. How does he say they assess school threats?
So they're working to get every school to assemble a team, an administrator, a school psychologist, counselor, school officer, police officer, who will be trained in this threat assessment tool. So if there is a threat, they'll do interviews and decide, okay, is there even a sliver that this may be serious? If it is, we'll go into a full investigation. They'll look at, does that student have access to weapons? Have they researched, have they done any kind of planning? And then they'll also look into the history, the mental illness history or the criminal activity history of that student, and based on that figure out what the best intervention would be. But if they have even a slimmer of doubt that it was not a joke, if it is serious or possibly serious, they'll launch a full investigation.
And we do have, I'll come right back to you, Laura, we do have a bite here I want to get to from Mueller on the importance of intervention.
But really, I think we're going to get the best return for that is on prevention activities that support children in a way that keeps them from committing violent acts, keeps them from wanting to. Prevention that helps us identify threats early and respond with intervention and support. Those are the things that keep a gun off a campus.
All right, Laura, you had a question?
Well, I was going to say, Megan, is there this sense that there's an increase in these kinds of threats? Because this county's had really awful school shootings that date back a couple of decades. So, now we hear about it, and it's, the Lego posting of a gun and things like that. I mean, what's your sense? Are there more or?
I spoke with interim DA Summer Steffen, and she said that they were anticipating an increase in threats following any school shooting. So it's of course there's an increase, but it's normal after there's a school shooting in the news. But she said that she also believes the increase is because people are just being more cautious and reporting more. And to her, that's a really good sign. She says that 80% of people who shoot up schools have told somebody that they plan to do that. And so people in the community are kind of the best way of prevention.
So how does the DA's office work with the various schools and the county education office regarding these threats? How do they work together?
So they have that special prosecutor that I mentioned, and that person has kind of a global view of all of the threats over time in San Diego County. They're well trained in this threat assessment protocol. They can quickly go do some cyber checks and see where the threat is coming from. Sometimes it's trolls out of the country or on the other side of the country. So they're able to assist, and they're also trying to become kind of the central clearinghouse for information. Sometimes there may be a threat it's deemed that maybe there doesn't need to be any kind of criminal no charges, basically. And that's something that the school might just kind of hold close. They're encouraging schools to go ahead and just loop the DA in so that maybe that's a person who wasn't serious this time, but they're going to be serious a year or 2 years from now, and they want to be able to quickly pull up names, and if it is that person, they can take more swift action.
All right. President Trump famously touting here since that shooting in Florida about arming teachers. There are some guns already in San Diego schools regarding staff.
Yeah, according to state law, the only people who can have guns on campus are sworn police officers, retired sworn officers, and security guards. And our school districts do have those on campus. There used to be sort of a loophole or some flexibility, whatever you want to call it, that allowed a superintendent to kind of write a waiver for a licensed gun carrier to bring one on campus. And the state legislature closed that last year. So it's just really security personnel.
And I don't know if there's been a survey or if you've had a chance to talk to many teachers, but any sense of how teachers here feel about guns in classrooms?
I haven't really talked to them specifically about this, but just kind of monitoring social media and knowing the kinds of concerns teachers have right now, I imagine they fall in line with what we've been seeing, which is, why don't you fund us some books?
Right, they're not too keen on it. I think there was a story just out of Georgia yesterday. Atlanta Constitution had it, where the teacher of the year 2 years ago wound up bringing a gun to school, a troubled man, and shot through a window. Nobody got hurt. So
well, I remember a couple of years ago, I think it was a Tierra Santa principal who had a gun on campus and got in trouble because he had a gun on campus. And you know, it's interesting to me. We have community colleges that don't have police forces that carry guns on those campuses, and there's controversy when they decide to go ahead and do that. But even they're feeling that need to have that police presence, rather than rely on local law enforcement to get there quickly.
Yeah, I know San Diego Unified did a survey of their parents related to budget cuts. What can you live without? What must stay? And at the top of that list was our police force. Do not cut there at all. So people are worried about security on school campuses. Right. But Mueller points out that school campuses are still some of the safest places for kids to be.
Now, before we leave this segment, I did want to get to the point that it kind of does feel different these days in the national gun debate after the Florida shooting. A lot of these students there are starting a reform movement, demanding gun reform here. There was a tweet from a junior there at the high school in Florida, Sarah Chadwick. She said we should change the name of AR-15s to Marco Rubio because they're so easy to buy. I mean, this is getting to be an edgy debate. Famous senator down in Florida had a town hall down there, and he had a lot of folks in his face over that. Does it feel different this time? They're talking about student walkouts, marches. Are there walkouts planned here?
Yeah, there's walkouts planned, and there's walkouts at school campuses quite frequently regarding wars or all kinds of things. But I did speak with some students at Helix Charter High School who had that incident I guess 2 months ago, where a school police officer body slammed a 17-year-old girl. And I kind of noticed that they seemed to be inspired by the kids from Parkland, Florida. They came out to a school board meeting where this was not on the agenda, but they kind of knew that press would be there. They had direct asks of lawmakers and decision makers. They knew which agencies had the power to change what they wanted to change. So I think that kids are definitely more savvy than they have been in the past.
And they'll all be voters in a short period of time, a couple of years perhaps. Well, I'm sure this issue is not going to go away, and we'll be following and monitoring it as we go. Well, we're going to move on. Donald Trump campaigned successfully by claiming the U.S. was awash in undocumented immigrants coming here to harm Americans. Real-life stories, not to mention facts, got short shrift. But many such stories are heartrending. And Jean, start by telling us about the one-year-old Salvadoran boy separated from his parents for months and who sought asylum here.
So Mateo Fuentes, he was a one-year-old boy from El Salvador who was brought across Mexico to the United States border by his parents with his 4-year-old brother. What happened is something that we're seeing increasingly under this administration, which is that the boy was taken away. It's worth noting the father crossed with the 1-year-old separately. The mother and the 4-year-old decided to cross afterward. They were in a rush to get the baby to the border because he was so dehydrated from traveling on the roof of Mexico's infamous train La Bestia, and they didn't have enough bus tickets, is what they tell them. They didn't have enough money for bus tickets for all 4. So the father came with the baby, and the baby was taken away from him and sent to an office of refugee resettlement facility 1,500 miles away in Texas. And the father was detained in Otay Mesa, where he remains.
And why is he still there in detention?
So they've appealed for. They've requested that he be released on parole. They had that denied. They're appealing that again. But essentially, what is happening is the mother was able to get across, and she was finally reunited with the baby after months of trying back and forth with the U.S. government, saying, "This is my child. My baby is by himself without a parental guardian, all the way in Florida. Please let me reunite with him." There was a lot of difficulty there, which is very, very common in these cases because the communication between the Office of Refugee Resettlement and Immigration and Customs Enforcement was very difficult to get documents from ICE. ICE had the woman's birth certificate. ICE had all of the documents that ORR needed to be able to prove that this was her son, and there was a lot of communication difficulty.
I wanted to note here, of course, that these are asylum seekers here, and what are they fleeing there in their home country?
Right. So this family in particular said that they were getting death threats, extortion by gangs. They had this shoe business that was doing okay, and it's very common in El Salvador for the gangs to extort people for money, but they didn't have enough to survive, and then they began to get the death threats. So that's why they left. And
we have a bite here from the mom who was seeking asylum. Let's hear that.
You're not going to stay in your country to be killed. A lot of people know they're separating families, but people are always going to keep coming because it's a fight for your life, for the lives of your children.
And that was Livia Caceres, right?
Caceres,
okay. And is this a new policy separating families? I mean, is it kind of a targeted thing with a desired effect?
So it's not a policy, but we do know that the former Homeland Security Secretary, John Kelly, said early last year that they were planning to they were considering a plan to separate asylum-seeking families at the border as a deterrent strategy to create this sort of fear and anxiety in Central America so that people will not come anymore. We don't know that they have not made that a policy, but what we do know is they've made it a practice. We're seeing an increase in cases, dozens of cases across the border of this happening. Whether it's functioning to deter people is it's very unclear. As we heard from Caceres, she says that lots of families know that they're being separated at the border, but they would rather have to deal with all of the stresses that involves than stay and potentially have their children killed.
It's life and death. Kay, you had a story this week about the lawsuit the ACLU got involved. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so in that case, it's a mother who was separated from her daughter when they came to the border to ask for asylum. They're from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The daughter was 6 years old when they were separated. She actually celebrated her 7th birthday after they were separated. She's being held in a facility in Chicago, and the woman is being detained here. So the ACLU filed a lawsuit on her, on her behalf to try and get ICE to reunite the family.
Okay, and Supreme Court also got involved. There's a lot of lawsuits and entanglements.
On which?
Not in that case in particular, but they had a decision that could affect the detention times, did they not, this week?
Yes, so there was a huge Supreme Court decision this week it's the Rodriguez case, or sort of as it's known in the immigration world. It actually came out of the Ninth Circuit. There was a man who was a green card holder. He committed a crime, was detained to possibly have his green card taken away, and he ended up in detention for more than 3 years and never had a bond hearing during that time. And so he ended up making a class action lawsuit saying, like, at some point while we're being detained in these proceedings, we should have a right to go before a judge and have the judge decide whether or not we need to remain in detention while these proceedings are happening. And so the Ninth Circuit had made a ruling where they said, okay, every 6 months you need to put people before a judge and let the judge review their custody decision, whether they still need to be in detention or not. And the Supreme Court came back and said the sort of reasoning, the way that the Ninth Circuit had read that law didn't work. That the Ninth Circuit needs to decide on the constitutionality of how the law is written concerning what are called mandatory detention cases. So immigration law says certain groups have to be held in detention. And so the Supreme Court basically said that law is very clear that that's what that means. Now, if that's not constitutional, you need to make that decision, but you can't sort of take this other route in the way that you're deciding this case. So it's not over yet, but in the meantime, these what they were called Rodriguez bond hearings that were happening every 6 months, that was pretty much the only way for many of these folks, particularly asylum seekers, to have a chance of getting out of detention. Those are not happening anymore.
Laura?
And they're in detention not because they committed a crime in these asylum cases. Is that correct?
Right. So with anyone who comes to the border who doesn't have documents authorizing for them to come in, if they're from Mexico, so we share a border with Mexico, so in that case we would just return them to Mexico. But if they're from anywhere else in the world, we can't just send them to Mexico because of country agreements, right? So what we do is we put everybody in that circumstance in detention, and that includes asylum seekers who are arriving at the border and saying, help me.
So are they being held with people who are accused of crimes, or are they separated? How does that work in detention? There's
security level systems. So you have low level, medium level, high level security. They wear different colors. They're put in different units. So, the people who have committed very serious crimes are held in separate units from the asylum seekers, but they're all in the same place together. And I think it's also worth noting that at least at the Otay Mesa facility here in San Diego, there are also U.S. Marshals prisoners.
But this is a Supreme Court decision that's going to affect the case of Jose, for example, or at least it could, because at the very latest, he was expecting to be able to have this bond hearing I believe it would have been May, since he came across in I think it was October. But now he might not get a chance to stand before a judge and say, here's why you should release me on parole, and be able to await his his asylum case out with his child, where he's able to help his wife, his partner, Olivia, with the children.
We're seeing more detentions now under the Trump administration than under the previous administration.
Yes, it's very rare, at least from what I'm seeing and hearing, for someone to get released on parole, which is an ICE officer can make the determination that this person doesn't need to be held while they're going through proceedings. We're going to release them maybe on an ankle monitor or something like that. That's very rare these days. Most people are being held until they go before a judge. Now, there are some people who do have a right to a bond hearing, people who are living in the U.S. who don't really have a criminal history. They go before a judge fairly early in their detention to see if they qualify for bond. There are a few other lawsuits that protect certain groups, particularly like people with very severe mental health conditions, still have some different rights to hearings.
All right, well, we'll be following up on that, and we didn't get to Dreamers today, but we'll be updating that again. Lots of information and lots of news on the immigration front. Well, who doesn't want to see horses that have been treated badly rescued and cared for? That's the purported mission of a Valley Center nonprofit. But complaints about the operation, based, as I said, in Valley Center, have been rolling in for some time now, attracting attention of authorities. And Laura, tell us about the woman who runs the Highcaliber Horse Rescue and what her group is doing.
Well, her name is Michelle Nutilla, and she was a former San Diego County Animal Service employee, so she worked there. She was injured in 2010. She says in a fall and suffered a brain injury. As part of her recovery, she founded Highcaliber Horse Rescue because horses were basically saved her from this her life, which was over as she knew it. So she created it. It's a nonprofit. She started it in 2013. She raises a lot of money to rescue horses, as do a lot of horse rescues. And she's very active on social media and things like that to drum up support for her organization. But she has a large number of critics who question her methods.
And we should say she has a lot of support, and she raises funds, as you said, to buy horses at these auctions and all, and bring them into this organization. But the complaints really started rolling in, did they not? They
did. And, you know, if you go online, you can see her thousands of supporters, and you'll see her thousands of critics. It is amazing, and they are back and forth since iNewsSource's story published this week. The comments on our Facebook post are just there's huge dialogues about this. But what she does is every Tuesday there's an auction in Ontario. This is one of the ways she rescues horses.
Just up north in Ontario, California.
Right, in San Bernardino County. And she goes up there and she Facebook Lives fundraising efforts. She says they've got this many abused or horses that need to be rescued. I'll need this much amount of money. And it's not just to buy the horses, but to pay for their keep and all that, you know, the hay, and to support her property. And you can see on Facebook, the people that donate through Facebook. She also has PayPal accounts and Venmo. There's nothing wrong with that. That's how she's raising the money to support her nonprofit. But the real issue about some people in the horse rescue business say that she engages in animal cruelty because she's really just fundraising to buy these horses, and then she doesn't really try to rehabilitate them or so that they can be adopted out. That she is too quick to destroy them, and the way she destroys them is with a 22 caliber rifle shot to the head, which sounds horrific to some people not in the horse world, but it is one of the approved methods of euthanasia for horses
in California. Mm-hmm. And some of the complaints, though, that are questionable about her judgment on euthanasias, and what does she say? What's her response to this?
She says that these people are just unrealistic. You cannot save every animal, that a lot of these animals that she's rescuing are in such bad shape. And once you do an evaluation of them, and she says she works with a vet, it's cruel to keep them alive. And that, I think a quote in our story was, euthanasia is a rescue. So
what kind of injuries do they have, or why are they being auctioned off in such poor condition?
A lot of them have, they've been abused by their owners, and they've been seized and put up for auction. They're sick. They've been let to be run wild, so they're kind of uncontrollable, and you try to train them and get them back to a shape where they can, somebody could adopt them and, for their kids or their own place. So.
In the iNewsSource story, your story talked about San Diego County authorities recently had the Los Angeles SPCA go in and inspect this operation and didn't really find a lot of alarming things in that one.
Right. The SPCA, according to the county, didn't find anything unusual. However, the county is working with Highcaliber to get a permit for the place. If her ranch out in Valley Center, if you have more than 3 horses, you need to get a permit. We haven't confirmed this, but we're told a lot of people don't get permits, and she's one of them. And so she keeps, some people say she has as many as 150 to 200 horses on her property, which can only accommodate 100. The county is working with her to get her place properly permitted.
Now, that wasn't the only folks that the SPCA up there, of course, San Diego had them do it because they had a conflict here with her past, but a lot of other people are looking, the Cal Vet Board, Environmental Health, a lot of folks are looking at her, right?
Complaints have been made to the Attorney General's office, the Federal Trade Commission. Those probably have to do with the fundraising because both of those agencies look at that. The critics say that she's not properly using her money. She's not been charged with anything. She's not been arrested. We do know in the county, the sheriff's department's involved, vector control, all sorts of county agencies. There's state, federal, and local agencies that are examining this organization. Some of it is the nonprofit status. They haven't filed as a nonprofit their taxes, but they got an extension.
All right. Well, we'll be looking for follow-ups on that, and I'm sure iNewsSource will be doing that. That does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Megan Burks of KPBS News, Jean Guerrero of KPBS, Kate Morrissey of the San Diego Union Tribune, and Laura Wingard of iNewsSource. And a reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.